Support comes from the Missouri Forest Products Association. Missouri produces wood pallets, railroad ties, white oak barrels, hardwood floors, and more. Details on the variety of products made in the state are at choosewood.com.
We hope you enjoy listening to this podcast of St. Louis on the Air, brought to you by University College at Washington University, with undergraduate and graduate programs part-time, evening, and online. University College at Washington University, offering world-class education within reach.
Welcome to St. Louis on the Air. I'm Don Marsh. Today we go behind the headlines. On a recent program, we talked about successful charter schools and what makes them successful. The issue of unsuccessful charters came up without much discussion as to what made the others unsuccessful. We wanted to dig a little bit deeper on that, so we brought in our education reporter, Ryan Delaney. Ryan, most of the charter schools are successful, but...
we do need to make that clear that there are very, very successful charter schools in the city, and you had some of them on this program last week.
The subject of the program was what makes charter schools successful. We're basically bent that way. Yeah.
Yes, but there was a question that you asked about whether or not charter schools have failed, and that I believe led to some comments from listeners, and just begs the question for some clarity, I think. And saying whether or not a charter school has failed is a tough question to answer, because it's subjective and, in the eyes of the beholder, a little bit about what you deem failure. Because charter schools have closed, and that's not necessarily to say that just because they are closed now means that they have failed.
How do you define it then?
Well, I don't have a straight up and down answer for you, but some examples historically in about 2 decades that charter schools have operated in St. Louis. I think there's some examples of charter schools that have failed. The first answer that came to my mind after listening to the segment last week was the Imagine Charter School Network, which was the largest charter school system in the city of St. Louis at its time. It had 6 campuses educating about 3,500 students or so, and that's the only example of a charter school in St. Louis where the State Board of Education actually basically had to come in and do what I kind of consider the nuclear option, which was revoke its sponsor's ability to be a sponsor, and thus kind of removing a link in that chain of how charter schools operate to close down the Imagine schools. There was some questions about finances and administration of the Imagine network. It was a for-profit charter system with some real estate dealings that this was a national charter school network. And here in Missouri and other states, there were questions about how much rent Imagine was paying to its landlord, which was a company that was also owned by the Imagine Charter School Network, things like that. Also, more important to the day-to-day of the school, its students were not scoring very highly on state performance exams. So that school was closed in 2012, and that left 3,500 families and 3,500 students to find new schools. And in a lot of that case, St. Louis Public Schools, the traditional district, had to step up and find room for a lot of students in a short amount of time.
How does that work with regard to for-profit charter schools, with regard to funding?
Well, it's different in each state, and that's what I think makes the broader conversation and debate about charter schools very hard to follow, is that every state has different systems. Here in Missouri, the actual direct charter organization has to be a nonprofit. We do have some national charter organizations such as KIPP and Eagle. Gateway Science Academy, which was on here last week, is run by the Concept Schools, which is a organization that they operate charter schools in several states. However, they are nonprofits. In Missouri law, they can bring in for-profit charter management organizations to run the day-to-day operations of those. Right now in St. Louis, at least, there aren't any. Imagine was a for-profit. Confluence Academies, which is now the largest and also has some troubled past, there was using a for-profit. They no longer are. So there can be some for-profit elements in that, which raises concern among some people about the finances of them and where that money is going. But for the most part, it is supposed to be a nonprofit system.
How are charter schools impacting the St. Louis public school system? I mean, it is part of the public school system.
They are public schools, yes, and they do receive the per pupil state funding that SLPS gets. So there's no question about it. There's competition about it amongst these charter school networks. And, some of their budgets now go to marketing. You see it more with some of the larger organizations, ads on the sides of buses and flyers home. Even SLPS does radio ads. Each student equals a certain amount of money. So when your enrollment at a district or a charter school decreases to another charter school or to the traditional district, that's less money coming in for you. So these kids do. I mean, it's a very kind of crass way to look at public education, but there are to an extent dollar signs about these kids.
So you can argue that the charter school system is in some ways weakening SLPS.
I think that's harsh. The amount of money that is spent on marketing, I don't have the numbers off the top of my head, but this is something we looked at last year. It's not a huge amount of money. There are, however, people, and I was talking to a teacher from Roosevelt High School, one of the comprehensive high schools in St. Louis, run by SLPS, that does not like charter schools because it depletes that resources. So that is an argument that people make, that charter schools funnel off aid and weaken the traditional school system. But to say that they are stealing money from the school is hard. I mean, it is bringing sort of a capitalist element into it.
I wouldn't say stealing. I didn't say. I said weakening.
Weakening.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, it's the way that Missouri's education funding formula works is it's supposed to be per student. So the more students you have, the more money you get. So it's supposed to be equitable in that sense.
How many charter schools do we have in the city?
Specific buildings or actual schools, a little about 34, 35. However, there are some like networks that run. Gateway Science Academy has two or three different schools. Confluence is a network of about 4 or 5 schools. So to use the jargon, LEAs, but basically agencies that are running schools. There's I think about 18, but about 34 schools. I think I might have that off one or two.
Do any of them appear to be in jeopardy now because of whatever reasons might cause them to fail?
Well, there was Paclaris Academy closed at the end of last school year after struggling for a long time, and it's sponsored the University of Missouri St. Louis decided that to close it down, which is a big role in the job of a charter sponsor to close a school that is failing. And that's the argument that charter schools make, that when they are not performing well, they get shut down. That's kind of the answer to people who say that they are not held accountable. But, you're not going to close down SLPS, but you can close down a charter. Confluence Academy is, as I alluded to, is a charter network that has been struggling for a long time, much to the consternation of the State Board of Education, which does not have the ability to list a charter school as unaccredited the way that they do charter schools. But for years, Confluence test scores have been below what the state considers to be proficient and below SLPS. But I should note that if you look at each individual SLPS school and each individual charter school, it's a jumble. I mean, I have this in front of me where there are a good number of charter schools that perform better than SLPS schools, and then the gifted and talented magnet programs of SLPS maybe doing better than a charter school. So,
as I understand it, most of the charter schools have sponsorship by institutions of higher education.
That is the main one, yes, and kind of how the law was set up. School districts can sponsor charter schools, and SLPS has in the past. The 2 that I can think of have been closed, and it's not something that SLPS is actively doing. There is also a state commission that can sponsor charter schools that was actually created after the Imagine schools were shut down. So one part of this commission's job is sort of a fail-safe. If a sponsor is removed, the commission can step in, but they can also independently sponsor. And they sponsored their first charter school actually just this summer in St. Louis, Kairos Academies, which is scheduled to open next fall.
It's a very active phenomenon going on here in St. Louis, obviously, with the charter schools.
It is, and charter schools educate about a third of the students in St. Louis who attend public school. There's about 36,000 children in St. Louis enrolled in public schools, and charters have about a third of that. SLPS is about 21 to 22,000, and enrollment's up. Some preliminary numbers that I got this morning, enrollment at charters is up about 800 students without any new schools opening this fall.
Well, that tells us something, doesn't it?
And actually one fewer schools than there were last year. So,
really?
Yeah.
Even more so. Well, Ryan Delaney, thank you for bringing us up to speed. Anything you want to add about the charter school situation here?
Oh, that would take a couple more shows.
Okay,
so
well,
we'll leave it there.
We'll
Thanks,
schedule.
John.
We'll
Yeah.
schedule. This is St. Louis on the Air on St. Louis Public Radio, 90.7 KWMU.
Support comes from the Missouri Forest Products Association, committed to conservation and careful management of the state's forests to make them more resilient and better habitats for wildlife. ChooseWood.com.